Hello everyone, and welcome to module 2 for our course. Remember, we're just from going through module 1 and we'll look at a lot of things, a lot of stuff there, especially with introductions into motion design. So now we're going to look at module 2 of our course, and which will be design principles for motion graphics. So that is the title of module 2. So as you all know, every field, professional field, there are always some principles, there are always some guidelines, there are always some rules which are always put in place which you need to follow. And these guidelines are there to guide you, that's to assist you, to help you in order to accomplish a particular task or a particular purpose. So it is the same thing with your motion design career, or your career as a video editor, or your career as a graphic designer, because all of these complement each other. All these three fields complement each other. So what we are going to look at are going to be those principles. What are those guiding principles? What are those guiding factors? What are those things which will guide your way as a motion graphic designer, as a video editor, to be able to accomplish the best projects, to be able to do what you need to do? So the first point which we'll look at as a principle will be the purpose and context. So before you start working on any project, the first thing you should outline is the purpose for that project and the context for that project. That is, what is the goal of that design? What is the purpose of that project? Why are you doing that project? That's the first thing you should do before you start any project. So before you begin any project, the first thing you should do at the beginning is to think of the purpose of the project. What is the reason for this project? And to be able to get the purpose, you must answer the following questions. Number one is that what is the goal of this project? That is, what do you aim to achieve at the end of this project? The second thing you should ask yourself is, who is the target audience? The target audience are those who want to project whatever you are doing to. The third question you should ask yourself is, what is the tone and the style of your message? That is, in this project you want to do, what will be the tone and the style of your message? We'll talk about tone and style of your message. We're talking about how do you want to convey the message. Do you want it to be something that is, like, let's say, friendly, or do you want it to be something that is sounds very serious? Is it something that is a motion graphic for a very serious something, or it's a motion graphic for kids, or it's for adults? So it will determine the tone you will do. The fourth question to ask yourself is, how will your projects be delivered and viewed? That is, what is the method of delivery for your project, the project you are working on? How do you want to deliver the project? Do you want to deliver it as an MP4 file or whatever? And how will it be viewed by the audience? So you must also answer these first questions before you begin every project. Visual hierarchy and composition. So from just the name visual hierarchy, is simply the way your elements are arranged away together in order to guide your viewers' eyes from the most important to the least important. That's what visual hierarchy is all about. So with the idea of visual hierarchy, you tend to make your most important elements stand out away together. That is, the things you want the viewers to see most, you tend to make them stand out. Let's take, for example, you want a particular text to capture the viewer's attention most. You can decide to make it bigger, or you want a particular object to capture the attention. You can decide to give it a particular color, a bright color which stands out from the rest, such that you guide the viewer's attention from the most important things to the least important, such that the most important things are the first things they pick, such that when they start following this content, the most important things are the things which grab their attention most. Are we together? So with visual hierarchy, as I've already said, there are many ways in which you can achieve visual hierarchy. You can either do it by making a particular element bigger so that it catches attention. You can give it a particular shouting, a color. You can give it a particular color which attracts attention. That's depending on how important that element is. That is, do you want this element to be seen most? Do you want this element for is this what you want the viewers to focus on most? So having that knowledge, having that thinking, having that understanding, you say, okay, this is what I want the viewers to focus on most. This is what I want my target audience to get the most. So I'll put more emphasis on this particular element in my project. So I'll put more emphasis on this particular text, on this particular graphics, such that they stand out, such that they are not just plain, but they stand out. Okay, like take for example this simple text I've just received, simple graphic here. As you can see, it says, please wash your hands before going in. Now, if you see, following the principle of visual hierarchy, the essential thing I want the people to pick there is wash your hands. So as you can see, I've made it bigger and bolder. Are we together? Because I want your attention. I want that wash your hands to grab your attention, because that's the main message I'm trying to communicate there. That's an example of visual hierarchy. So, okay, so that's it for the second principle. So the third principle, we'll look at animation. So the third principle we'll look at is animation principles and techniques. So that's the third principle we'll look at. And I want us to understand that animation is the core of motion design. That is, it is the heart of motion design, because motion design is principally about animation. It's principally about moving elements around. It's principally about making inanimate elements. That's static graphics animated. So if there has to be any motion design project, then animation must be involved, meaning that you cannot do any motion design project and not do animation. There has to be animation. So animation is so important and is the core of motion design. So in every motion design project you want to carry out, you must have an understanding of animation techniques. You must have an understanding of animation principles. Are we together? So you must get an understanding of these animation techniques and principles. I will be looking at some of the animation principles. So now we're going to look at the principles of animation, which you need to know. You have to know them as a motion designer. The first principle of animation we'll look at is the squash and stretch principle. And the squash and stretch principle is a principle that is applied in animation to give your animations a sense of flexibility and weight. Are we together? To give the object in your animations that sense of them being flexible and having weight. Are we together? And this squash and stretch principle is simple. Okay, like take for example, you are animating a ball that is bouncing on the ground. Are we together? Ball bouncing. Now, normally, because remember that in your animations, you are trying to make, when you are animating, you are trying to make sure that your animations are connected, look like real life things, so that they engage the viewers. You know, your animations have to be close to what actually happens in real life, in real time. Are we together? It should not just be completely abstract, even though there is allowance for your animations to be abstract, but it has to be close to what happens in real life, so that your viewers, your audience gets that connection. Okay, I'm saying, take for example, you're animating like a ball, a bouncing ball, right? Like let's say a lawn tennis ball, which has a soft texture. Now, in real life, when that ball bounces, the shape does not remain the same. Are we together? It stretches, it widens out because it has hit a hard surface. You get what I'm saying? So that is where the squash and stretch principle apply. Are we together? So this principle is so important, and the application is that it has to give that sense of flexibility, and you apply it where it is needed. It is not in every situation that there is a squash and stretch principle applied. Where you see as a designer that, okay, in real life, this is how this thing runs. This is how, okay, a ball will normally behave like this. So I know that this is the principle I can apply with my knowledge of animation. This is the principle I apply to make this animation look close to what is happening in real time. Okay, so moving on to the second animation principle. The second animation principle we'll look at is anticipation. And anticipation, going by the word anticipation, is like expecting, like what next, like you are expecting something is about to happen. Are we together? That's what it means to anticipate, like expecting something is about to happen. So the principle of anticipation is used in motion design
when you want to prepare your audience for the next action. Are we together? So this principle is used to prepare your audience like for the next thing that is about to come. Take for example a carpenter about to nail a cupboard, right? The example I've given there. Okay, now if you are doing like an animation and let's say a carpenter is nailing something, like there's someone nailing do a carpentry work. Now with the principle of anticipation, obviously if the carpenter has to nail the cupboard, what does he have to do? Normally his hand will obviously go up. He will raise his hand to gather momentum. Or you get him in order to bring it down and hit the nail with the hammer. So by doing that, the carpenter's hand will obviously have to go up. So when you are animating, applying the principle of anticipation is that you give your audience that foresight into what is about to happen next. I'm just taking an example together. So that hand must go up first. You cannot just do it briefly. It won't be practical altogether. So his hand will be raised first, or go up at least to a certain distance in order to gain that momentum to bring the hammer down and hit the nail. If you understand what I'm saying. So that's it about anticipation. So moving on to the third principle we have there. The third principle we have there is staging. And in the principle of staging, you assume the position, you the motion designer, assume the position of like being a film director. Are we together? And as a film director, a film director is like the overhead guy. He wants to see this done here. He wants to see this thing done this way. He wants to make sure that characters move like this, characters stand like this for the best. He wants to make sure the characters are in the best position. So in the stage, in the principle of staging, what you're trying to do is you are like a director now acting a movie. So you are putting in all your elements. So in staging, what you are simply doing is you act as a film director. That is, you focus the camera, because when you're doing animation, there are camera tools in your animation software. We should get to that later. You focus your camera to make sure your cameras are projecting, they are picking the most important detail, so that you can get your audience attention to focus on the right elements. Your cameras don't just pick any kind of detail and project. So in staging is so important because you have to really give in a lot of attention to make sure that the right elements are projected to your audience. The fourth principle of animation we'll look at is the principle of follow through and overlapping action. Follow through and overlapping action. So the application of these principles is that this follow through and overlapping action, they are movement principles, right, which come together to make sure to help your animation to look more realistic. So the follow through concerns the parts of the body that continue to move when the character stops. Are we together? The follow through has to do with the movement of part of the body when the character stops. Meanwhile, overlapping action is used to demonstrate the fact that parts of the body don't move at the same rate. Like for example, when you have like a character moving, and then when the action is over, the character's hair, as the character is moving, the hair was also moving. But even if the character stands, the hair does not just settle at the same moment. It still moves a little bit. There's still a bit of that friction. There's still a bit of movement on the hair because of overlapping action. So these principles also are used to make the animations more realistic. Like let's look at an example of an animated object that follows this principle. Take for example this animated character, where you can see as he moves, you see that all the parts of the body are not moving at the same speed. So some parts are not moving at the same speed, and even when he stops moving, there are parts like the head of the character there, it still takes some time before it comes to balance. So that's the idea of overlapping and follow through. So moving on straight away to the fifth principle of animation, we'll have the principle of straight-eyed action and pose to pose.
Now this principle works with hand-drawn animations. Are we together? This works with drawing animations. And I want us to understand that first of all, let's talk about straight ahead action. Now, straight ahead action has to do with drawing your animations frame by frame. Are we together? From the beginning to the end, that is every frame you do an animation for every frame. So if you want to do animations which are very realistic, which have realistic movement and are fluid, are we together? And then the best principle to apply there will be the straight ahead action, where you draw everything frame by frame from start to finish. Every frame you animate it, every frame. Meanwhile, now with the pose to pose technique, that's with the pose to pose animation technique, what you do is you draw the beginning of the frame, the end of the frame. So after drawing the beginning of the frame and the end of the frame, then now later on you can now come in the intervals as between the beginning and end of the frame and begin to keyframe and animate all that stuff. I know you don't know what keyframe is now, but in the later class we'll look at the meaning of keyframes, but just have this principle for now. So that's it for straight ahead action and pose to pose. And the pose to pose technique gives you a bit more control within the scene, which allows you to increase the dramatic effect of the motion. When within animation in real time, you get to understand this point more clearly. Okay, so we're going to look at a little video clip which shows us a practical example of what this pose to pose and straight ahead animation principle is. So if we look at it, as we said, the straight ahead principle, you animate each frame. You see, as it indicates there, each frame is being animated, while the pose to pose animation is done at the first frame and the last frame, and then you come in between and begin to work on the intervals, start adding different keyframes. Hope that's understood. So just take your time and watch and see what is going on there. It's a very short clip, so I've put it on repeat. It's a short clip, so it's on repeat. So moving on to the next principle, the seed principle is the principle of ease in and ease out. And this principle is also known as the slow in and the slow out principle. Now, what is this principle talking about? It's very simple and basic. The idea of this principle is that objects tend to accelerate slowly when they begin moving, and they tend to decelerate also slowly when they are about to stop moving. That is, for example, a car wants to like a car wants to move, right? It does not just take off immediately at top speed. At times it may accelerate slowly, it starts slowly and starts moving before it takes off at top speed. And even when it wants to stop at times, it will decelerate, as it will start reducing its speed before it stops altogether. So that's the principle of ease in and ease out. Movement starts slowly, becomes fast, and then begins to end slowly as it started slowly. Are we together? So that's the principle of ease in and ease out. So with ease in has to do with the beginning, with the motion starting, coming in, starting slowly, and ease out has to do with the object when the motion is and it's about to stop motion, it's about to stop moving, it ends slowly to give a kind of realistic view. Okay, take for example this animated object here. It's showing how slow in and slow out does. Take for example, when it's about to begin, see it starts slowly and moves, and when it's about to end, it slows down at the same time. Are we together? So the seventh principle we look at is the principle of arc. Now, this principle of arc, it just talks about the path through which objects travel. Are we together? Like in reality, like take for example, in real life, there's a particular path, there's a particular way in which objects travel. They have a trajectory. What trajectory there just means path. So it is therefore important that when a designer is doing a design and he wants to make an animation of maybe that particular object or element, it's always good that it is animated in the same way as the thing moves in real life. That the same path which the things will obviously take in real life is the way it should also be done in the animation, in order to achieve realism in their projects. Moving ahead, guys. The eighth principle of animation we'll be looking at is the principle of secondary action. And secondary action is a principle which is used to lay emphasis on the main action that is going on. Or together, secondary action that is used to lay emphasis on the main action that is going on. So secondary action helps to add dimension to your characters and objects. Or together, it helps to add dimension to your characters and objects. Like, okay, let's take for example, a character is moving down the street. There's a person, like a human being, is moving down the street in your animation, and then swinging his hands. Now, those swinging of his hands, those movement of the hands as he's moving, that's a secondary character. That way helps to give your animation that feeling, that kind of human feeling. So it is not the main thing happening. The main thing happening is that the character is moving down the street. That's the main action. But now adding that swinging of the hands, that's the secondary action. It's not the main character. It helps now to add, like give a human touch, a human feeling to your animations. And however it be, as we have the secondary character should not distract the viewers from the main character, the primary action that is going on altogether. So secondary character should be done in a way that does not distract the viewer from the main action. So just imagine the object where the character was moving down the street and there's no secondary action, like the hands are just static. It looks somehow, but when those hands are moving, it adds some degree of emotion and connection, that this is that human emotion and connection to your animation. So that is about secondary character, secondary action. So that is about secondary action. We move forward to the ninth principle, which is timing. And the principle of timing, is simple and straightforward. Now, as in real life, animation is all an issue of timing. Are we together? You must get your timing
right? Now, this principle of timing helps to make your animation look realistic in that it considers the size and weight of your characters in relation to what and who is around them or with it. So timing considers the size and weight of your characters and their reaction. Okay, let me explain it this way. Okay, let's see like the example there. It says, for instance, a lightweight object will react faster to being pushed than a heavy one. So therefore, if you get the time of reaction wrong, your animations tend to look unrealistic. So it's simple there, like let's say some like a lightweight object. If it is pushed, for example, you discover that it will move faster. So if your animation, you animate it in a way that it does not move, it moves rather slower than a object which is heavier. It does not make sense. It does not look realistic. Meanwhile, a heavier object will obviously move slower if pushed compared to a light object. So let's say there are two objects you're animating at the same time. One is light, one is heavy, and they are pushed. Obviously, one has to have a faster reaction time because it's lighter. If they have the same time, then it's a problem. If the heavier one is slower than the faster one, then it's also a problem, and you lack that realistic touch in your animations. So move to the 10th principle, which is exaggeration. Now, all since we have been talking about the principles, I've been saying over and over again that your project needs to be realistic. It needs to look close to what is actually happening in the real world, which is true and very important. But at some times, that's to a certain degree, when there is no touch of a bit of exaggeration in your projects, it may look boring. Are we together? Or at times, too much of realism can make your animations look boring and just static. So at times, there's a need to add a small touch of exaggeration. Like you just exaggerate something, a small degree of exaggeration to your characters in order to get your content, your audience constantly engaged. Like, okay, for example, let me give a practical example like what I've given there. Like, if you have watched like cartoons like Tom and Jerry, at times you see, or in cartoons, any cartoon, you see at times when the character is surprised, you see the character's jaw will drop to the ground as the mouth will fall down. Now, that actually is not real because in real life, there's nobody who will be surprised and his jaw will fall to the ground. But you see that, just that little part, if you have watched it, see, it gets you laughing like, aha, it looks interesting, like, oh, the mouth fell down because he's surprised or he's shocked. So that's what exaggeration is all about. You add some little, you add some things which are not real, but they are just to engage your audience. You don't need much of exaggeration, you just need a little degree of it. Moving to the 11th principle of animation, we have the principle of solid drawing. So to be able to apply this principle of solid drawing, you will need to have an understanding of the basics of drawing. You also need to have in-depth knowledge of things like weight, balance, gravity, lighting, shadows, and more. So what is the reason for this principle? The reason for this principle is that at times you will need to make your animations 3D altogether, and to be able to get these animations to be 3D, you need to understand some principles or some basics of drawing. You need to understand what gravity is, you need to understand lighting, you need to understand shadows and more. But as for this principle, you only understand it better when you're in an animation class. For now, just understand it that way. So the 12 principle of animation I'll look at is appeal, and this is the last principle of animation we'll be looking at. And I want us to understand that this is one of the most important principles of animation. Are we together? Now, what is the concept of appeal? Now, the principle of appeal is all about the fact that your character should carry a degree of charisma. Are we together? When I say degree of charisma, that means your characters should carry a nature that is convincing. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying. So that it can be interesting enough to engage viewers. Like, let's say you are animating, you are doing an animation, and now you are creating an animation for a child. Now, if you create an animation for a child and you give the child like features of a mature man, you see, it loses that appeal. It doesn't make sense to the audience because That's a child you are doing animation for. The child should have a tender look, a round face, a kind of, you know what I'm talking about, right? So it should look like a child. That's appeal. That's, you are making appealing to the viewers. You are engaging them because, okay, I'm expecting to see a child. Obviously, I need to hear someone with a little voice, a round face, a child looking tender, not looking all grown up and strong. And on the other hand, you expect to see something like, maybe, let's say, there's no actually standard rule for appeal. You just have to use your knowledge and experience to get it done. And let's say you're trying to animate now for like an old woman. Obviously, you know an old woman looks like. You cannot animate an old woman keeping her looking young unless it's a particular message you want to pass. So that's the concept of appeal. And so that is it for the 12 basic principles of animation. And remember, we're under point 3 that we're together. We're looking at point 3. Remember, under the topic elements and principles of motion design that we're together. So we're under point 3. Remember, I said point 1 was that the first element or principle of motion design before you start any motion design project is to make sure that you set the goals. What is your goal? What is your define the goals for the project? I would say point 2 was to take note of your visual hierarchy and composition. And now point 3 was to put in place now the motion design principles. Are we together? The animation principles. Point 3 was to put in place the animation principles. So under point 3 now, we're looking at the different motion design principles which we have spoken about. So now we're going to move to point 4 of design principles and elements in motion design. Okay, so moving to the 4th element of motion design. 4th element to take into consideration of motion design is sound and interaction. Are we together? Sound and interaction. Now, I want you to know that sound and interaction are very important in motion design. In every motion design project, sound is a very key player. It plays a very key factor. You know, when sound is involved in your projects, it reshapes the project. It gives the project a different dimension. Are we together? When the sound is involved in your project, it makes your project more interactive. If someone to get to me. And as we have written there, it says sound can complement and reinforce the visual elements of your motion design, as well as create mood, rhythm, and emphasis. I understand what I'm saying? So, you know, sound adds some emotion, some degree of emotion and connection to your design. So most of the times, motion graphics, depending on the project you are doing, will always be backed up by some degree of sound. This could be voiceovers. A voiceover is just like, if you know what a voiceover is. A voiceover is just somebody explaining what is going on. It could be just normal sound effects playing on the ground, be background while the graphics are being displayed. All these little sounds help to make your project more interactive and engaging. Are we together? Now the second part, interaction. Now interaction engages your viewers, are we together, by permitting them to have control or influence the design, as well as also create feedback and responsiveness. So interactions can be, some interactions could include buttons or sliders. Are we together? So buttons like you can click here and it plays, that's interaction. You click, it stops playing, that's the interaction. That's the play and pause. Sliders, you slide up, slide down, so that's interaction. Okay, so moving on to the fifth and the last element we'll look at is feedback and iteration. And it's important to know that feedback and iteration is also important in your motion design projects. And feedback has to do with getting the opinions of your clients and target audience about your project, what you just did. You need that opinion to really hear what they say. What do they think? Is it okay with them? Are they okay with the sound? Are they okay with this? Are they okay with that? Is it good? Do you need an improvement or change? And iteration is simply the process of making the necessary changes based on the feedback you receive. So that's it for this session, guys. So see you in the next session.